This morning, we're going to be thinking about good beginnings. And we're going to start with a quiz. All right? There's not many of us here, so I'm looking for you to pull through. All right? These are famous first lines. All right? These are classics. First one. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. That's right. A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens. All right, we're on a roll. All right. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday. Lord of the Rings. That's right. All right. Little Tolkien. All right, you guys are doing pretty good. But this one. Call me Ishmael. No.
Genesis.
No.
One of the chapters.
Moby Dick. All right, Herman Melville. Classics. All right. All right, now this one, this is a true classic. Dog, big dog, little dog, big dogs and little dogs, black and white dogs. Oh, no, don't give it away. Let's see if other people know it's a classic. Hello. Do you like my hat? I do not. Goodbye.
Your favorite book.
He knows a classic when he sees it. Go, dog, go. Kevin and I are sophisticated readers. All right. Now, one more. In the beginning, God.
I said Genesis.
Genesis. That's right. Beginning of the Bible. It's interesting how the beginnings of a story set the tone for the entire book quite often. We get an idea of what's going to come. And we also get an idea of what the subject is. A troubling thing, though. Christmas Carol, Lord of the Rings, Moby Dick, Go Dog Go. What do they all have in common?
They're a book.
They're all books and they're all fiction. Have you ever been told that the Bible is fiction? That it's a fairy tale to make us feel better? It's kind of unsettling. Now, when I was a teenager, I'd been told that different times, and no big deal. Kind of let that roll. But then, I came across this book. Now, as a teenager, I was really getting into studying the Bible, and my faith was really growing, and I came across this book, Guide to the Bible. Well, that's got to be good. It's about the Bible. By Isaac Asimov. And I thought, he's a famous professor, a tremendous author, and so I read this. And I read it. He doesn't tell you in here that he's an atheist. But boy, did he really knock my faith. Not all at once. Here's a picture. That's Isaac with the chops there. So you know that you're dealing with somebody good. But what was going on was an erosion of my faith. Now, when I think about erosion, sometimes erosion happens all at once. You can have a dramatic eroding event. But quite often, erosion is small things all at once. I'm sorry to bring work here for you. I'm sorry that work showed up with erosion here. But when you think about erosion, quite often it's a little bit, and then all of a sudden you notice how bad it's gotten when it's really visible. It's like this eating away of things slowly, and you don't know how much is gone. That's what was happening with me as I went through this book and other things that were going on. My faith was slowly kind of getting washed away, and doubts were creeping in bigger and bigger. I want to think about this a little bit. One thing that Asimov talks about is how the Bible uses myths from other cultures. You borrow a myth from this culture and borrow a myth from that culture, and you pack it into the Bible and you say, this is God. And so, Epic of Gilgamesh is one that he used quite a bit. Has anyone ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh? It's on 11 tablets. It's a very old story. It was probably written in written form before Moses wrote the Bible. Or, he didn't write the Bible, the first books. And so, you can make a big deal of, oh, wow, look at these things. Now, think about this. So, Aruru washed her hands, she pinched off some clay and threw it into the wilderness. Remember what Faye read in the youth message? God took dust, created Adam, using clay. Okay. Next, a snake smelled the fragrance of the plant, silently came up and carried off the plant while going back and sloughed off its casing. Is there a story about a snake in Genesis? Is there a story about a snake taking eternal life away from Adam? That's what's going on here. Eternal life is being taken. Are these sound effects helping you? That's supposed to be connections. All right, here's another thing. Make all living beings go up into the boat which you are to build, the dimensions. Have you ever heard of a boat story in Genesis? A flood story in Genesis?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Noah. Yeah. Flood story. Now get this. There's a dove. There's a raven. There's water that needs to dry up. Who would expect water to have to dry up after a flood? That's novel. But it's all there, and these are similar. And I'm reading this stuff, and I'm thinking, oh, what's with the Bible? It's really... Now, I don't know if you've ever really been faced with things in which maybe it's just small bits of things that kind of start building up. You start thinking, I've got some serious doubts. What do I believe? Here's a piece of the story that most people don't mention from the Epic of Gilgamesh. The gods were frightened by the flood and retreated, ascending to the heaven of Anu. The gods were cowering like dogs, crouching by the outer wall. Ishtar shrieked like a woman in childbirth. A lot of similarities to Genesis here. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Think about the opening line of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God. The subject of Genesis is God. It's not just about creation. It's not just about how we show up. The subject is God. In this story, the subject is a cool story. And the gods can't control anything. They can't control their own flood. They're mad at each other. They're all weird, and it's an interesting story. It's entirely different. Just because there's little bits and pieces, what a surprise. When it rains hard, it has to dry up afterwards. I think most of us would probably include that in a story. But the miss is, God is the subject of Genesis. The Bible is all about God. And He is so different than any other religion. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. It's page 1 in the Pew Bible, in case you're wondering where to find that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. A few key pieces I want to think about. First, God of the Bible. When it says in the beginning God, the Hebrew word here is Elohim, or it's Hebrew, so it's Elohim. Elohim, which is a powerful God. And this Elohim is a plural noun, but a singular action. This God who is so majestic, so above other things, you have to honor Him with a plural word. Sort of like kings quite often use we because they're big dogs. God gets a plural because He's so much. But what He's doing is singular action, which means there's one God. Not a bunch. One God. This is a radical book. Entirely different. If they were going to copy other religions, this would not be the way to do it. God is unique and distinct. And he is a good God who is transcendent and immanent. You are going to be happy about this. I have a concern that this is kind of a dry topic. So I'm going to do a couple sketches here to help you visualize how these things work. Oh boy. Yeah. All right, thank you. So we have, from Genesis, we have God and creation. Doesn't that just clear everything up for you? Oh, that's awesome. God is above creation. God is before creation, but he's a part in action with creation. This will make more sense as we go ahead. We're going to be thinking about how worldviews can kind of erode away this idea. Here's the first one. Materialism. Have you ever heard of materialism? We're pretty good at it with our culture. I like the little caption here, spending money you don't have on stuff you don't need, in which what happens is the only thing that's important is stuff. The only thing that's important is creation. Now, this doesn't necessarily be a worldview of only people who aren't Christians. This ends up to be our worldview sometimes. We forget about the eternal and we focus on what we think about when we try to go to sleep at night. Think about the things that go through your mind when you're trying to go to sleep at night. God? Or all those problems of today, yesterday, and tomorrow? This is something that we quite often move into because we forget that in the beginning, God. We forget how God is over everything, and this becomes our world. Another worldview that kind of erode away in our faith. Anybody recognize this guy? Buddha, yeah. Now, I'm assuming most of you probably haven't been to a Buddhist temple lately. Just guessing. However, this is a view in which instead of everything is the universe, everything is God. In which if we can just get into the same stream of consciousness, if we can just be one with everything, it's a miss. For one thing, this is always changing. If we're getting to be one with something bigger than us, we're always changing it. God doesn't change. Most likely, we are not going to become Buddhists. Probably. It's not part of our culture. But we're influenced by those thoughts. This idea of becoming one with some sort of greater force or some sort of greater thing. God is greater. There's a very big difference. And what brings this idea out is there's a word for create, bara, which is create out of nothing. God created out of absolutely nothing. He is so powerful, he is so above our creation. There's a step beyond. Okay. There's only two more, don't worry. Next one. Does this picture look familiar?
Yes.
What is it?
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Yeah. Now, I want to mention, I am not saying that you shouldn't watch Star Wars. I'm not saying Star Wars is bad. That'd be great to go and say, oh, did you hear this pastor guy? He says Star Wars is evil and it's going to ruin the world. No. But what I am saying is, don't build your theology around Star Wars. Star Wars has this dualism idea in which there's a force, right? Use the force, right? Right? Remember that? have the force in which there's good and there's evil, which is always confusing to me because some of the bad guys are all in white, and they should all be in black. I mean, Darth Vader's black, so it helps me, but some of the stormtroopers, right? It's confusing. But there's this dualism idea in which there's good and evil fighting all the time. It's this eternal battle. And you just really hope that good wins out in the end. And you can tell who the better actors are, so you know who's going to win in the end. But it's this idea of, there's this struggle of good and evil throughout. But when we read the Bible, when we read those opening lines, in the beginning, God, there's no evil in the beginning. There's no concern about evil being close to an equal of a good God. There's no concern about who's going to win in the end. And sometimes I think we can get so wrapped up in how dark our world is that we forget that this is not a real model. There's one God who's above and over everything. One last one. I thought this was a clever little poster. In clip art, if you put in deism, you get God loves you, he just doesn't want to get involved. Here's this view. You have God, and you have creation. And they're two distinct things, and God doesn't really relate to us anymore. God wound the clock and let it go on its own. This is a deep part of our culture. I put in deism in clip art, and you get a picture of Thomas Jefferson. It's how rooted in our American culture it is, this idea that somehow God is so transcendent that he can't be involved with us. It's that big guy upstairs idea. There's a big guy upstairs, but he's not personal with us. We can't know real prayer. We can't know real worship. We can't know God in a personal way when we wake up in the morning. It's very different than the picture of God we get in Genesis. This is kind of dry, but it's important for us to think about how our view of God can be eroded by just living life, by just reading a book that looked pretty good. It didn't have any pictures in it, but it had some maps. It was decent. But it brought about an erosion of faith. And just living life, we're at risk of erosion all the time. We need to come back to the basics. Come back to who God really is. I want to talk about another aspect of erosion. I have been blessed in life in which I can't say I have had terribly traumatic events happen in my life. Like events that are so awful that I step back and say, well, God can't be real. At this point in my life, I have not had those moments. But you know, there are a lot of small things that can add up. That erosion idea of a lot of small things just kind of keep building up and start doubting and start wondering. And here's an event that started a coupling of a lot of things for me. Does anyone remember January 28th, 1986? Challenger. No, it was on a school day. Because I remember, I got home from school, we only had a half day of school that day, and I got home, and I wanted to watch it, and I saw the clip of what happened. I didn't know anybody on there. I mean, I felt like I did because the first teacher was going up in space, the McAuliffe, and so it was this big deal. And what a random disaster. Not that it created a crisis of faith all at once, but it was one thing that I didn't have answers for. And a little while later, there'd be another thing, and another thing. It started making me wonder about, is God really a part of my world? I want to work through chapter 1 to think about this a little bit. Because this is Genesis all over again. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. So we know this is talking about Jesus. And that from the very beginning, Before time, before creation, Jesus was there. So not only can we be confident when we face those crisis moments, those eroding moments, we can be confident that God is there, but that Jesus, God in the flesh, was there also. The same one who wore skin and endured what we live through every day. There is a hope in knowing that no matter how bad the events are, the string of events that we're in, that God knows what we're going through. And he's present with us. Verse 3. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. This is a reminder of who's in control. The call to worship this morning was from Ephesians chapter 1, which pretty much said, very similar to a passage in Romans, God brings about good. God is about fulfilling his will. No matter what the short term looks like, no matter how bad the pieces look right now, God is about making something really good with life. A purpose beyond what we realize. Sometimes we start getting into these other views. We start thinking, well, life just brings bad luck. Or fate brought this about. When we return back to Genesis, we remember that God is the subject. There's not a lot of chance things going on. God is firmly in control. This morning we prayed about the people in France who must be going through a time of questioning. Even me, so distant from things, I end up saying, well, why? And I need to remember God is in control and he is present with us. That those events do not erode away my faith in who God truly is. Verse 4. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. God is the most important thing in life. We're talking before about how with materialism, it can be so easy to get sucked into things. It can get so easy to get sucked into, where are we going to go for a vacation, or what activities we're going to have our kids in, or what am I going to do at work, or what am I going to do about this problem, or what am I going to do about this family member who's got this going on. We have all these things circling around, which are problems that need to be addressed, issues that need to be dealt with. John chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 1 remind us of perspective. To keep the eternal first. God is there for eternity. Our relationship with God is forever. Measure that against an intensely difficult situation right now. Eternity is going to win out. Perspective. Last one. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. We know that God wins. Genesis chapter 1 lays out that God is firmly in control. God has a plan. Everything is set. But we know there is darkness today. We know that life is not always easy. One thing to remember about darkness. Sometimes light is brightest when it's the darkest. Think about the darkest of nights, and when somebody comes in and turns the light on, you're like, what are you doing? It's like blinding. The light is just as bright as when the sun is out. But when it is pitch dark, the contrast is overwhelming and we can't miss it. Sometimes in our lives, when we face those darkest of times, we can expect to know God and his light all the clearer. In the beginning, God. I hope that we remember that basic. There's a good chance you've never read Isaac Asimov's book and been sent on some sort of crisis. I bet at some point in your life somebody has said something, or you've come across something that you've read that sowed some doubts. Or maybe you've had some events in your life that have just started building up and you start doubting if God really cares or is there. Return to the basics. In the beginning, God. He is above and beyond, but he's also with us. Never give up hope. Remember the basics.